This is the RPG Pundit, final boss in Internet Shitlords. And today I'm doing a review of Player's Handbook Like a Fucking Boss by Venger Satanis. Let me first preface by saying that a few people have been commenting on my videos that my videos have very low production value. I don't think you're ever likely to see high production values on this YouTube, so don't hold your breath. But besides that, you'll note that today I've gone even lower on the production values, and well, that's just a matter of convenience at the moment, but I thought it was appropriate. So, this is a review of Player's Handbook Like a Fucking Boss by Venger Satanis. Before I continue, I should preface by saying that I have a certain relationship with Venger Satanis in that he is a co-host with me of the Inappropriate Characters YouTube show. And I don't have anything to do with the writing of this book. I don't make any money off this book. I'm not paid to review this book. I'm not making money off the review. At least not directly anyways. And I just wanted to clarify, though, that there is a certain connection between me and Venger through the show, but I don't think that that'll affect my ability to review his products. I've certainly given him middling reviews on other stuff. I've given him great reviews on stuff I thought was great, like the Islands of Purple Haunted Putrescence, for example. But other stuff I was not so impressed by. One of the books I was not that impressed by was his How to DM Like a Fucking Boss, which to me had a few pieces of good advice, a few pieces of bad advice. It had a lot of stuff that I felt that whoever was RPG savvy enough to actually find and buy his book would already know. So I was quite curious about just what the Player's Handbook Like a Fucking Boss would look like. I was fairly concerned that the book would be a whole book about tips for players that would be mostly boring. As it turns out, it's only the last 15 pages or so of the book that have that kind of material advice. So this stuff is mostly stuff that's, again, kind of self-evident for the most part. You know, like, the game master is under no obligation whatsoever to indulge you. Oh, wow, what a surprise. Be appreciative. Oh, thank your game master. That's nice. So, this stuff is not all that useful. There's some note space at the end. But the rest of the book is different than what I expected, and it turns out to be a kind of guide to supplement the Player's Handbook material. He's basically, he's talking here about OSR or O5R. This book is not really an OSR book, except that it can certainly be used with OSR material because it's mostly system neutral, as it says there. He also talks about the O5R. I don't know for sure if Venger has ever actually, it's an illustration there. I don't know if Venger for sure has ever actually done any 5th edition stuff. O5R is basically like making 5th edition in the old school style. Or even if he's even played 5th edition. The reason I don't know this is because Venger has a habit of calling things OSR that are not OSR, like several of his games. There are some things of his that are OSR, namely Islands of Purple Haunted Putrescence, but other stuff that isn't. So this is a bunch of basically tables and a few other kind of mechanics that you can use to enhance your overall game from the player point of view. So you've got stuff like fantasy sounding name table, a fantasy calendar that is complete with some like astrological signs. There's this is a fairly good table here, which is of items and abilities and stuff. It's basically a background table of objects that you start out with. As you can see, it's a fairly long table, which is always good. There's mechanics for honor and shame, for dishonor and infamy. There's names for items. There's ways to enhance magic swords. There's, you see, here's something that gives me an example of stuff that really shows you that Venger's comprehension of OSR isn't always all that on the money. Did you bring it table, which you'd roll to see if you remembered to bring an important piece of equipment. Now, OSR a lot of it is about resource management. And the funny thing is that the introduction of the book, he talks about how he played OD&D and he was amazed with the simplicity of the kind of the resource management side of it and how important that was, and he hadn't realized that until now. Except then he goes and pulls a table like this one, right? Where, the rule is always in old school play, did you write it on your character sheet in the appropriate section? Then you have it. If not, you don't have it. You don't get a luck roll to see whether you had it or not. Some more illustrations. As you can see, it's very nicely illustrated. There's stuff here for personal growth, random belief systems. Then we get into this like Vorpal stuff, which is basically like extra superpowers for fighters and then for wizards, where they can choose once per combat to just do some crazy magical effect. And that seems to me, again, to not really be getting the OSR vibe. Like if you were making some kind of special OSR game that was all about like extra powered characters, which you could do, because the OSR is a big tent, that's fine. But in like a default OSR game, that's not what wizards and fighters do, right? It's not their thing. And worse still, you've got like stuff for the stuff for bards and clerics are comparatively lame, right? They're just like lists of stuff. So powers that a bard can select, or that a cleric can select. So, he can create strife, discord, and suffering through one true wayism. All right, fine. But this should have some kind of a mechanical side to it, right? These sorts of things, there's stuff that you do mechanics for in the OSR and stuff that you don't do mechanics for in the OSR. And if there are powers, they should have some kind of mechanic. Otherwise, all you've got here is a list, a descriptive list, right? There's other stuff that wouldn't necessarily need mechanics, but this sort of stuff does. Defining characteristics, defining moment in a character's life. So there's a lot of stuff for making background elements. End boss battle bonuses, which again I find a little bit dubious. And here's another one. It's a mechanic to resolve a big combat at the end of the session when there's not enough time. Now, this is something that just doesn't sit well with me again, because normally if there's a big combat and you're at the end of the session, you've only got a half hour left and you know a fight is going to take an hour, then you don't resolve it really quickly. You end the game early, unless you're not going to meet again for 2 months or something like that, in which case you just tough it out and stay later. But one thing you definitely wouldn't have is a 12-step random table with a 1 in 12 chance that you just die or you're knocked unconscious. Right? He has this habit in some of his products to do stuff that's absolutely pure luck, that you just roll on a table, and if you got like a 2 or a 1 or something like that, you're dead, or you lose an arm, or you turn into a woman or whatever. And it's just like completely random. That has no element related to the character's own abilities, right? So here, this table, it doesn't matter if you're a fighter, if you're a wizard, if you're a thief, whatever it is, it's just pure chance with no respect for level or anything else, which is not really something useful in the D&D context. His games have a lot of that. Alpha Blue has a lot of that. Alpha Blue is not an OSR game, even if he says it is. And so this stuff is fine in other games, but it's not really all that useful in an OSR kind of context. Stuff for describing your attack. And then there's this thing here, which is a list of character accomplishments. Another nice drawing there. As usual, there's a bit of lustiness in his product. a player character checklist to show off stuff that you've done, which, see, at first I looked at it and said, oh, this could be interesting. It might be some kind of an experience mechanic. But instead it's just like, it's like a quiz in, teen magazine, right? Like, is he the ideal boyfriend or something like that? Like, how good of a player were you? Do the checklist, and it just says like, oh, you're awesome or you're not awesome, right? This would have been so easy to turn into something more useful. And then we get to the part at the end, which I've already talked about. So the whole product is under 50 pages. I guess it's exactly 50 pages if you count like the blank spaces at the end. There's the back cover. Is this useful? Well, I think it's more useful than his game mastering book. It's less useful than other books he's made. But on the whole, it's got a couple of things that are kind of worthwhile, right? And if the price range of the book or the PDF is good for you, then, there might be a few things that you can pick up here. There's enough stuff that is interesting, especially if you're looking for like a table of flavor material for your player character, I mean. Then, yeah, it's okay. It's not bad. It has a few missteps, which again I think are just a product of Venger having a very particular interpretation of, and no, not a particular interpretation. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. He just doesn't know what the OSR is. He wants to create his own vision. He came in with his own idea. The OSR is this, and that's what it is for him. And you just have to accept that with his books, that he says the words OSR, and I don't think he knows what OSR actually means. But on the whole, there's some worthwhile stuff in here. So, Player's Handbook Like a Fucking Boss by Venger Satanis. Check it out if you're looking for stuff for your enhancing the flavor of your player character, or if you're in really desperate need of player advice. But odds are, if you're watching this video, if you know who I am, or you know who he is, or you're dedicated enough to role playing to even have found this video, then you've probably heard most of that advice before. Maybe not in as edgy a language as Venger likes to use, but it doesn't strike me as tremendously useful. The first part of the book is much more useful. Luckily, that's the majority of the book. The last part is just the last 10 or 12 pages or so, and the rest is material, some of which is pretty good. That table of objects is pretty good. This one here. So yeah, check it out. Currently smoking Master the Paya apple plus Fox's Provost.